Happy Tuesday. I hope you had a great weekend. I'm excited to talk about books today. As you can see, I've got a whole stack, so we're going to get into a lot. We're going to talk about Ariana Franklin and her Mistress of Death series. What's particularly interesting about this series is that Ariana Franklin wrote the first 4 books, and then she passed away, and her daughter wrote not only the 5th one to wrap up the series, but a kind of prequel-ish book that's related to some of the others in a tangential way. But I'm super excited to get into these because they're from ancient or medieval England, Matilda and Stephen Civil War England, and Henry II Plantagenet Dynasty starting England. So that's one of my favorite times. So I'm really excited to get into these. So let's do it. Okay, so these will be a little bit wonky because, like I said, the first book that's related to this isn't written by Ariana Franklin, so that's The Siege Winter. So this takes place before the other 5 books and only has characters that then show up in later books. So the main character in this book does show up later in these 5, and one of the tangential characters in this book shows up in quite a few of these books, but it's not really related. So for those who don't know English history, after England started being ruled by kings, it was ruled by Henry I. And Henry I had no sons. And so he was going to pass it to Stephen, his nephew. However, when his daughter, who was the Empress of Germany at the time, was widowed and brought back to England, she then became his direct descendant and was supposed to be Queen of England. However, all the bishops and noblemen went and followed Stephen, so such ensued civil war. And the Empress Matilda, while she did not win, did secure the right for her son, Henry II, to be on the throne, and that is how the Plantagenet dynasty starts. So this book takes place during the Civil War. I did not give anything away in what happens in this book. This is a very small part of the Civil War. And I did enjoy this. The characters are interesting. And this says Ariana Franklin at the top. It's written entirely by Samantha Norman. It really just takes the characters from her mom's book. But it was a really good read, and I thought Samantha Norman did a great job. My only downside was that there is not much of an author's note at all at the end, which I did not enjoy because I like when my historical fiction gives me the facts at the end, and she did not do that, and that was my biggest disappointment in the book. It rotated back and forth between somebody telling the story in retrospect and you experiencing the story in real time, which I really enjoyed, and it left me guessing until the end who the person was telling the story back, and I really liked that. So this was very good. I definitely enjoyed it. Now, on to the actual Mistress in the Art of Death series. That starts with the first book is Mistress of the Art of Death, which of course makes perfect sense why the series is then called this. And this is written entirely by Ariana Franklin, and it is about her main character, this absolutely fascinating woman who comes from Salerno in Italy and travels to England to be a part of this team that all of them are coming from Salerno to help figure out why deaths are happening in this Cambridge town. And I really liked the main character. Her name is Adelia, and I like her a lot. She's not a typical medieval English woman, but she is definitely, Salerno is a place that really believed in the education of women, and that really shows through here, which is why she is who she is. And the reason that she is brought with is because she is what is considered a master of death. She's just a mistress because she's female. But they're basically the world's first coroners, and they were all trained in Salerno. And so that is why she's brought, so that she can help figure out what's happening. So this really kicks off all of the characters. There are a couple of twists that I did not see coming. And I really enjoyed this first take into these characters. The second book in the series is called The Serpent's Tail, and this one gets much more into the politics of this time. So as we talked about, Siege Winter takes place when before Henry's on the throne. As Henry comes to the throne, he is looking for a wife, and around the same time, Eleanor of Aquitaine divorces the French king, who she has 2 daughters with, and leaves the French capital. When she does, she is the most eligible woman in all of Christendom and is wanted by every man because she has loads of wealth and loads of land and is wanted because she owns like half of the south of what is modern day France. And all of that comes with her marriage. It's all part of her dowry. And she's beautiful and young and spirited, and so men everywhere want her. So even though she's 11 years older than Henry, Henry finds her, woos her, ends up marrying her. They then rule most of what is Western Europe right now. All of England, obviously, the Welsh fall into English control during Henry's reign, and then also a large chunk of what we consider modern day France is then also a huge chunk of their empire. Henry is a difficult king, husband, and father, and part of that means that Eleanor and her sons revolt against Henry. All of that is prior to this book happening. So when Henry II's mistress, who is hidden away in this specific castle, gets poisoned and dies, it is automatically thought that Eleanor had to do with it. And Eleanor, obviously, we don't know what historically happened, but that's what this book is about. Is it really talks about the politics of this time, where Eleanor is in relation to Henry, and how their relationship is, their relationship with their sons, who at this point are all still alive, and trying to figure out how to come into their place in the world while their father is still ruling large chunks of their land and what would be theirs if their father died earlier, which he does not. So that's what this book is about, which I really liked because I really like Eleanor of Aquitaine. I've read a lot of books about her and I'm a big fan. And so it was fun to, one, see the perspective of the side of people who like Henry, but clearly also have a begrudging respect for Eleanor and who she is and how she fits into medieval England. And I really enjoyed this book because it was a nice diversion into the politics of this time, which I really liked. The third book in the series is Grave Goods, which opens in a courtyard or in a churchyard where you're not entirely sure what's going on, what you've seen, what's real, what was distorted by memory. And that is a really great exemplification of what happens throughout this book. Basically, it's a quest to see, do King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, are they in this castle, like this castle claims that it is? Because they claim that, there's a lot of pilgrimage to this site, which greatly benefits the local economy. So when Adelia and her loved ones come to see if that is in fact the case in the order of the king, they are met with a lot of hostility. So that's the question mark. It's like, what happened during this evening in this churchyard, and what does that look like for them? And then where they're at is really remote and really removed. So Adelia and her loved ones are definitely at risk. She befriends some of the local people, but some of the local people are really hostile. There's a criminal element that lives in the forest and really peruses there. And this forest is set up in a way, historically, evidently, I learned this in this book, something that they did along the roads in medieval England was cut back the brush as much as an arrow would fly in this time, so prior to longbows. And it would allow for people to travel safely without being worried that they would be struck by arrows. And that is not the case in the place where they are during this book because it is so remote. And one of the things about this book, there are characters in all of these books that go through all 5 major characters that you stay with. But in this case, we actually have a direct link from what happens in this book that then creates our villain for the 4th book. And the 4th book is a murderous procession, which sounds really dark, but is Henry II asks Adelia to accompany his daughter Joanna to Italy in preparation for her wedding to the King of Sicily. And so that is this story of how they proceed through there. There's religious persecution along the way, but you also are seeing that Adelia is at risk because of the previous, I'm trying to say this without spoilers, previous evil that she has come across and how that translates into this book. And this book is the last book that Ariana Franklin wrote on her own. And it has an awesome ending. I really liked how things unfolded, but I would imagine that if you read it not knowing that she died, but not knowing that there's going to be a fifth book, you'd be really upset, which I totally get. That then brings us to our fifth book, which, like the first book we talked about, The Siege Winter, this book is written by both Ariana Franklin and her daughter Samantha Norman. And it takes place about 18 years-ish after the fourth book. So the ending of the fourth book, you do get the outcome, but not the immediate aftermath, which was interesting. I would say far from ideal, but definitely interesting. And this book, instead of centering around Adelia, who is in it, centers around her daughter and what life looks like for her as she goes through the world as her mother's daughter. She's, like her mother, very unique and experiences the world in a one-of-a-kind way. And that's what this is about her finding her way in the world and continuing to come across the same things that her mother did, which is death and having to figure out mysteries that other people can't solve. And it was very good. As with The Siege Winter, no author's note, where the other four all have author's notes, which I really, really enjoyed. Overall, though, all 6 books were really good. And I do say that as somebody who really enjoys this part of English history. So I'm definitely a little bit skewed, but it was fun to go through a time in history that I knew fairly well and then to experience it from a completely different point of view. So there were people like Henry II, King John, Richard II, and Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry the Young King. They were all in these books, but they weren't centered around them in a way that other books are. They weren't main characters. What they were doing wasn't immediate. With the exception of the second one, it doesn't really factor around the political ramifications of what's happening in this medieval world, but instead it just connects with what's happening in the other pieces, religion, and what it was happening in more everyday lives. Not that the characters are having everyday lives, because they're definitely not, but what's happening in the villages and outside of war zones, and how the things that Henry and Eleanor and their children are fighting over impacts the everyday world, but in a much more abstract way, which I really enjoyed in comparison to some of the other medieval English royalty books that I have read. I would definitely recommend these, especially if you enjoy that period of English history, or if you like a historical crime book. It's not the first crime placed in history book that I've read, but I do think that they're really a fun read. So if you like that, I recommend these as well. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Happy reading.